It was built nearly 2,000 years ago, but it took ISIL fighters in Syria mere minutes to destroy an ancient temple in Palmyra. The UN's cultural agency has called it a war crime. Why is ISIL targeting these historical sites? And to what extent is it also profiting from them? This is Inside Story. Hello there, warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It's an area of the world that's home to thousands of years of history, sometimes called the cradle of civilization. And for more than a year now, parts of that same area have been controlled by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, an armed group that has become known for its systematic destruction of priceless artefacts across Iraq and Syria. Last week, its fighters killed this man, Khalid al-Assad, an 82-year-old Syrian archaeologist who devoted his life to studying and protecting the ancient city of Palmyra. And now the group has blown up just the type of thing the archaeologist was trying to protect, Palmyra's Baal Shamin temple, which has stood for over 2,000 years. It's all part of a plan by ISIL to get rid of so-called idols, though experts say that many of the archaeological sites it has destroyed are Islamic. This is Iraq's second largest museum in Mosul, which ISIL fighters ransacked in February. The armed group is also thought to have burned thousands of manuscripts and Ottoman-era books from the city's library. But ISIL isn't just destroying old relics, it's selling them too. The UN says that looting is being carried out on an industrial scale in ISIL-controlled areas. Many of these artefacts are being smuggled into Turkey or Lebanon, then sold off by dealers in Europe, the US or the Far East. And though it's impossible to tell just how much money ISIL makes from looting, it has set up an office that deals with antiquities and imposes a tax on everything that leaves its territory. So some good discussion points there. Let's bring in our guest today. Joining us on Skype from Ohio, an associate professor at Shawnee State University who specialises in antiquities and archaeological research, Amr Al-Azam. At The Hague, we have MARINA LOSTAL, a lecturer in law at The Hague University. She's also written a thesis titled International Cultural Heritage Law in Armed Conflict. And in the Dutch city of Deventer, Arthur Brand, art investigator and co-owner of Artiaz, that's an art and antiquities research and consultancy firm. He also joins us on Skype. Great to have you all with us. Welcome to the programme. We've got two big issues that we're looking at today. The destruction of antiquities in Iraq and Syria, and also the looting of them. So first of all, let's focus on the destruction. Amr Al-Azam, what do you know about how this temple, Baal Shamin, was destroyed and why it was chosen?
Well, clearly we can see from the images that a lot of explosives were placed there. You would have needed a fairly sizable charge to blow up a monument with that kind of large stone masonry. The explosion, again, is typical. The size and the spectacular setup of all this is fairly typical of what ISIS would do. We classify this as an atrocity class. This is something that ISIS does. They essentially commit these atrocities for a very specific purpose, for propaganda purposes, and this can be either killing people, this is where they dress them up in orange jumpsuits and then put them in cages and set them on fire and drown them, or they attack museums, or they, in this case, blow up sort of monuments. These are usually accompanied by high-definition photography. There's usually some sort of narrative. There might be music. It's all very slick and all very carefully crafted, and with one singular purpose: to send a very powerful message that ISIS can act with impunity and the international community is impotent to stop it. The impunity-impotence combination gives them a very effective tool. It resonates very well with their narrow base of supporters and also has a great impact on the international community. In fact, this is probably why we're having this conversation. So you can see the combination is very powerful, and it's one of the ways, and I say only one of the ways, in which ISIS exploits cultural heritage. This is a resource for them, and they use it in that manner.
So, Arthur, this gets the conversation started. It gets ISIL into the media. It gets it attention. But they captured Palmyra 4 months ago. Do we know anything as to why they might have decided to destroy it now?
You're asking me this question? I think they decided to destroy it now because they have so much to do. They are in the news almost on a monthly basis with new destruction. So it's just the right time for them. They weren't in the news for, I think, well, let's say a couple of weeks without beheadings. We had the killing of this archaeologist, which was, of course, huge news last week. So I think they thought it was time to do something big again.
MARINA, LOSTAL, the UNESCO is calling this temple's destruction a war crime. That's pretty strong language there. But it's not the first time we've seen such demolition in times of conflict.
It is not the first, and unfortunately it won't be the last. It is certainly a war crime, and this war crime fits into a broader pattern of iconoclasm that ISIL and other fundamentalist groups are carrying out. And actually, this last destruction fits into a pattern or a trend that I can say started in 2001 with the destruction of the Bamiyan Buddhas at the hands of the Taliban. And apart from ISIL, there are other groups operating, for example, in Libya or Mali, that are also targeting World Heritage Sites or cultural property to send a similar message. It is true because, for example, Irina Bokova, the chief of UNESCO, has said that this is a war crime, but this does not really solve the issue. Because there is not much that we can do to prosecute this war crime at this stage. First of all, or primarily because neither Syria nor Iraq are parties to the International Criminal Court, and therefore this court lacks jurisdiction to prosecute the people responsible for this destruction.
So as Amma was saying earlier, it just shows ISIL showing that it can act with impunity. Amma, just to move on to Khalid al-Assad, the archaeologist who very tragically was executed just a few days earlier. Why was he killed? Why was he seen as such a threat?
I think it's very important here to say a couple of points. The first is that ISIS has been known to commit these atrocity class acts usually as a response to military setbacks or battlefield losses. And if you look at previous atrocities, there's usually a connection, there's usually something going on. Now, again, recently ISIS has had a very mixed bag or a very mixed collection of losses and gains on the battlefield. And so as our colleague on the program said, this is a good time for them to get back into the game. In terms of Khalid al-Assad, I don't know if we should include him in this mix. It was very unfortunate, that he was killed, but his death and the manner of his killing is not of the atrocity class that we're used to seeing. There was no orange jumpsuit. There was no high-tech, high-definition video. There was no, it was just a very routine execution. I know this sounds callous, but really that's what it was. Like many hundreds of others who were killed before him in that manner. He was basically seen by ISIS as a regime sympathizer, and he was executed in that manner. So we should not really mix that unfortunate event with the atrocity class action that we are seeing today committed by ISIS.
Interesting you say that, because he was very closely connected to Palmyra. I mean, it was life's work, wasn't it, to work there and protect it. And he had been held hostage by ISIL for some time, and there is speculation that he didn't give ISIL what they wanted, i.e. his knowledge. Do you not agree with that?
Well, let me tell you this. First of all, he was arrested twice. The first time he was picked up was a few days after ISIS took over the city, when they rounded up hundreds of known regime what they considered to be, from the list they had, known regime sympathizers or pro-regime folks. He was taken away. He was imprisoned for a short while. He was sent to Raqqa, as far as I'm aware, and then he returned back. Then they picked him up a second time, and that's when he eventually was unfortunately killed. Now, in terms of what information he might have had, there was nothing in terms of material that they could have given them available for, there was nothing that he had that they could have wanted. The museum had been evacuated literally as ISIS was moving in, and Khalid al-Assad would have probably been involved in that evacuation. So they knew the museum was empty. They knew that it was evacuated. That was publicly known. They may have wanted to know from him if they had been anything left behind buried or hidden, because occasionally this is done. But he had no such information to divulge. The only other information he could have sort of had that they might have been interested in is the location of perhaps uncovered or unpublished sort of burials or such like. But again, this is very sort of tenuous. I don't think he had any secret information or special information that he could have given out that he was hiding from them.
Okay, well, let's move on then and talk more about the destruction of the site and indeed the looting. I mean, Arthur, there is so much awful suffering in Syria. I mean, every day we're seeing people being bombed. The death of Khalid al-Assad is just one small example of that. And viewers may look at this subject that we're talking about today and ask, why are we spending so much time talking about inanimate objects? But why is it important to discuss this issue?
Well, let's be clear. Any human life is, of course, more important than any statue, because any person is the son or daughter of somebody else. So first we have to say this. But then these statues, these buildings, they are our cultural heritage. What do we have? Only the current time. You have to look at the past. These fabulous cultures. A lot of these people in these Islamic countries often forget that we had pre-Islamic cultures before that, and they were responsible for some of the greatest inventions of mankind. And to destroy all these pieces is a loss for humanity. And I'm sure that future generations will curse us for this. And not only the guys who are destroying it, but also to us. What are we doing? And somebody mentioned UNESCO before, and I want to say one thing about UNESCO. UNESCO got some laws in the 1970s to stop the illicit trade. In the 70s, 80s, 90s, almost nothing happened. And now groups like ISIL are entering. And who is counting on them? Are they going to solve this? They will never solve this. It's not people on the ground should solve this. It's not something for UNESCO. Of course, it's important that they are there, but we should not expect miracles from these institutions.
No, and we will look a little bit later as to what more needs to be done. I mean, the United Nations Security Council has been discussing this very issue, focusing particularly on the looting. We will revisit that subject. Just before we do, Marina, I just want to stick with this issue of how the destruction of this history affects the people of Syria and Iraq. I mean, UNESCO was mentioned just before as perhaps not being good enough to solve the problem. But when it says things like the destruction is a form of cultural cleansing, people do pay attention to that. And I just wonder how this destruction does affect Syrians and Iraqis psychologically.
Cultural heritage is, as one commentator mentioned, the common heritage of mankind, of humankind, but it also represents the identity of one people or the people in which that cultural heritage is situated. So it destroys the identity, or it is a risk. There is a risk that these people will forget their origins, or that they will just be deprived of their symbols, of the symbols of the country. And this is particularly a problem in the conflict in Syria, because the conflict has become secularized, and it has become a sectarian conflict where Syrians have been pitted one against the other, when that was not the reason why the conflict started. So when this heritage is destroyed, it is basically depriving the society of a symbol to cling to after the conflict is over, to find ways of finding a way towards reconciliation of the society. So it's a loss of memory, and also is a lost opportunity for future reconciliation.
Can you let me just say one last closing statement on the previous question, because that's really, really important. This is a really important point.
Of course.
As you know, with regards to why we should preserve cultural heritage, why it's important, even though there's death as well. And I think this is not an either-or scenario. You cannot have one without the other. People without their history, without their culture, are lost people. Okay, and a culture without its people is meaningless. It's just inanimate object. So the two have to coexist together. That's the first point. The second critical point here is that Syrian society has ruptured across every possible single cleavage you can think of: sectarian, ethnic, social, economic. And the conflict has really ripped this country apart and the society apart. And one day when this conflict ends, they're going to need to find common denominators, ways in which they can reach out and connect again. And cultural heritage and this shared common history is one of those few remaining areas in which this is still possible. I'll give you a very simple example. There are people who currently, work for the state, are, working for essentially the regime, who are risking their lives to save their cultural heritage. For example, the evacuation of the museum in Palmyra would be a good case for that. Literally, it's driving out as ISIS is driving into the town. And on the other side of the divide, there are also archaeologists and museum curators on the opposition side risking their lives every day to try and save and prevent this cultural heritage from being destroyed. So here you have two opposing sides working for exactly the same purpose. The fact that they agree on this, the fact that they have something still they agree upon is going to be so important for us when we come to go through this process of reconciliation, reaching across the other side. Saving Syria's past is about saving its future.
OK. Arthur, what about all the artefacts that are being lost? How much of Syria and Iraq's history is circulating right now on Iraq's black market? And the world's black market, I beg your pardon.
I see a lot of them passing by. I'm being offered them myself.
Wow.
I get pictures of looted objects, even from the museums, but also freshly unearthed. So I think it's on a huge scale. And you can see it because there are satellite images from places where ISIL was not yet there. And after they reached that area, and it looks like a lunar landscape. So it's on a very, very large scale. And I have a lot of informants who are telling me that most of the small stuff, not the big statues, etc., but the small stuff is coming already through Turkey, through Dubai, to Munich, to Paris, to Amsterdam. So it's on a huge scale. And it's sad because these artifacts survived thousands of years. They survived wars, earthquakes, but these pieces won't survive you and me and the viewers at home because some barbarians are trying to destroy them. So this is the end of these fabulous cultures from the past.
Amma, what's your response to that? How does that make you feel hearing that?
It makes me sad. I don't even look at these images anymore. That's the thing. These people want to go back to the 7th century. Well, get rid of your telephones. Get rid of the cameras. Live like the 7th century.
Okay,
I don't want to see
and Amma, this is
pictures.
your history as a Syrian that you're talking about here.
This is very important, and there's a couple of points we need to put on the table here. The first point is this: ISIS did not begin the looting. Okay, the looting started in 2012. You look at the images, then this is when we saw a marked shift in the nature of the situation in Syria, from one where it was an uprising and peaceful demonstrations against a regime to an armed conflict between opposition and regime. That's when we started to see cultural heritage becoming a casualty of war. So the looting that we see started well before ISIS came on the scene.
But it's fair to say, isn't it, that it has escalated? I'm just trying to keep the discussion moving forward here to look at ISIL's involvement in this.
Right. Well, this is what I was going to say to you. However, what ISIS did, how ISIS changed the game, is by institutionalizing this process. They essentially took an existing situation that they came upon and they institutionalized it. They intensified it. They opened an administrative office in Manbij. They made it into a ongoing business concern that's very lucrative for them. But we have to be very careful in terms of saying that they began the process. They did not. The other point here is that they are not. I think it's a misconception to see them as just simply mindless barbarians destroying and looting cultural heritage without any thought. This is a very carefully crafted process. They see cultural heritage as a resource, a valuable resource, and they exploit it in the most effective manner. They loot what they can sell, and they destroy for propaganda purposes what they cannot sell. And this is not the action of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're doing it according to plan.
Marina, how do they know what they're doing? What expertise do they have? How much are they profiting from it?
Well, the problem is that they don't need to have an expertise, because what they do is to follow a very twisted strategy. When we look, for example, at the pattern of destruction and looting of following the list of World Heritage Sites mainly. And so, for example, what happened last Monday was the destruction of a temple of a World Heritage Site. So they don't really need to have experts, which they might have archaeologists collaborating with them. But what they basically do is to follow the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites of both Syria and Iraq and follow that systematically and decide what they're going to loot and destroy accordingly.
Arthur, who's buying them? I mean, you've been offered them. You're clearly not buying them, but who is?
Well, it was mentioned before that ISIL is not new in this game. Well, they are new in this game, but the game is not new. We are collecting for decades. So the illicit antiquities trade is there for centuries, for decades. And these people, ISIL is only maximizing the profits of it. They are now in control of these areas, and they sell it through mediators, to smugglers, because they do not have the knowledge to do this. So what they do is they use the old trade that was already existing there. I've been in this business for 25 years, so I know that it was before ISIL it was happening, and after ISIL it will be happening. So they are only joining the game. So it's the same buyers as always.
But how difficult, Marina, how difficult is it to sell these artefacts? I would have thought Interpol would be all over anything from Syria and Iraq.
From what I know, sometimes it is not very difficult to buy them because many of the artifacts they loot in might belong to Byzantine periods, and they don't have a mark saying this is from Syria, from Iraq. So there's no way sometimes of knowing if the artifact comes from Syria or Iraq, or even of knowing whether they're freshly looted. So it doesn't seem to be very difficult to know. And there might be, you might be surprised if you go on websites such as eBay, you might find some of these artifacts, but perhaps sometimes you don't have enough information or access to know if they are, as I said, freshly looted. I might say, however, that the International Council of Museums, ICOM, has a red list that it updates regularly with images and descriptions of some artifacts that collectors should check before buying these artifacts.
So, Arthur, I mean, it seems extraordinary that things can be sold on eBay. The United Nations Security Council has just banned the trade in artifacts that have been legally removed from Syria since 2011. Has it made any difference?
This trade is going on for decades, like I told before, and nobody could do anything against it. So I'm very pessimistic. What have we done in the last decades? What have we done to stop it? It's everywhere. I see it in Munich, I see it in Paris, I see it in New York. Auction houses were caught red-handed, the biggest auction houses, like Sotheby's and Christie's, they were caught red-handed in the 90s, in the 80s, in the years zero. So what can we do? We couldn't stop it then. We cannot stop it here. We should try. We should try everything because this is a crime against humanity. But it's not that easy. Like the previous commenter said, it has not a mark beneath it which says recently looted from Syria. So we should unite everybody, the auction houses,
Emma,
the police forces.
We need to try. How do you suggest we protect these cultural heritage sites?
I mean, look, there are a number of things that are being done. I mean, in the big picture of things, obviously, there is only so much you can do. For starters, just think of the resources being made available to those international organizations like Interpol, like the FBI, like the whatever the name of the police or law enforcement agency that exists in Amsterdam or in any other European country. You'll find that their teams are exceedingly small and they do not have the resources to be able to cope with such a huge influx of material coming out of conflict zones like Syria and Iraq. That is one of the problems. So maybe more resources in those areas. The second, and in fact, the only reason why this has really become a major issue is because we were able to link it to funding of terrorism. Otherwise, it would have stayed below the radar as it has done for many decades, as your previous participant mentioned right now. The only reason why now it's being discussed is because it's linked to funding terrorists. Now, in terms of what can we do and what is being done on the ground, I can tell you that through my work with activists, archaeologists, museum curators who are still living in Syria. Yes.
I do beg your pardon. I'm going to have to jump in there because we have come to the end of the show. Very sad loss of history indeed. Many thanks to all my guests for joining us today. Arthur Brand, Marina LOSTAL and Amma Al-Azam. And thank you very much to you two for watching. If you have any comments about today's show, do get in touch by going to our programme page at aljazeera.com or post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.